During the rectification of the Valdrani, the traveler came as a large and moving torb. Then, during the third reconciliation of the last of the McKettrick supplicants, they chose a new form for him, that of a giant slore. Many Shubs and Zools knew what it was to be roasted in the depths of the slore that day, I can tell you.
Time isn't holding up.
Pride only hurts. It never helps.
I hate Brenda, and a bad guy hit me in the shin, and I peed all in my pants.
Dad, I wish you could just shut your big yapper!
His work as well too, but that's for a whole nother story, talking about the Oxford movement. But he goes to this hospital for this very bizarre treatment of given these ancient drugs, and during his hospital treatment, he says he had a mystical experience with God, and this was the experience that he talked about for the rest of his life. He said he had a sensation of flight, which is obviously from the henbane, and this experience of being set on a mountaintop, and his exclamation was, if this is the God of the preachers, then I accept it, or something to that effect. So he associated that with what he referred to as God or higher power to later state to what he experienced. Now, he had a very interesting life that many people don't know about. He said that he actually channeled the 12 steps that he wrote about in his book from a 15th century monk, from the resources I have, and this is because he maintained an interest in spiritualism the rest of his life. But he says this came from this other intelligence that provided this information. And in fact, his biographer said that he had something in his house called the spooky room at his home, where they would go do seances or Ouija board activity, and so they were definitely into that. He also got really involved in the consumption of LSD, and he was part of a study group back in the 50s and I guess 60s, studying its use for assistance. People who assisted him were Aldous Huxley, a gentleman who has also a very sordid past from Brave New World and his plan to actually keep most of the world's population drugged on soma. It's talked about in his writing, his globalist writings that he had of an elite running over a drug populace. People like Gerald Hurd, who I've since learned was one of the earliest prominent New Age teachers in America in consciousness expansion. Even Claire Booth Lucci, who was a congressional figure, female congressional figure, whose husband operated the Time magazine. So a very interesting group. But he mentioned in this consumption of LSD that the experience he had was basically identical to his religious experience he had in that hospital, which is what he considered his contact with God. Now, coming here toward the end, I just want to share a little bit about what's coming, what we think is coming. Here is a quotation I'm going to give from one of the most prominent New Age leaders, Barbara Marx Hubbard. She's a woman who actually narrowly missed getting the vice president nomination for the Democratic ticket in 1984. Very influential person, particularly in global circles, and even with some evangelical figures, believe it or not. She had a message that she said she channeled from her spirit, and here's what the message she was given. It says, This is her spirit guide speaking. It says, out of the full spectrum of human personality, 1/4 is electing to transcend. 1/4 is destructive, and they are defective seeds. Now as we approach the quantum shift from the creature human to the co-creative human, the human who is the inventor of godlike power, the destructive 1/4 must be eliminated from the social body. Fortunately, you are not responsible for this act. We are. We are in charge of God's selection process for planet Earth. He selects, we destroy. We are the riders of the pale horse, death. So, this is a plan of spiritual rumble that's planning in our future. I spoke at a conference that was sponsored by the United Nations and World Council of Churches. That is a non-governmental organization, NGO, sponsored by this group, creating a new world religion called the Order of the Transfiguration. And the conference, international conference I spoke at in 2008, had the theme of reconnecting heaven and earth. And the theme, as they described it off the brochure, says that they will be discussing new sciences of consciousness and healing, which could potentially reconnect the worlds of spirit and space in the human psyche. And this is, again, what's being underwritten by the United Nations. And the cover of the brochure has a goddess who actually has the earth in one hand and has these stars in the other hand, where she's reconnecting the stars to earth itself as a type of liminal goddess. Now, a couple more points. There's another interesting character, and this person goes back to the time of the Babylon working with Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard. The female who they say that they conjured her appearance suddenly from an earlier magical working they did was a woman by the name of Marjorie Cameron. She assisted them in the Babylon working in 1946, January, with the goal of releasing the whore Babylon, which they were planning to be the consort for Horus, or the Antichrist, which was the resurrected Osiris. Ironically, she referred to herself later, and she was very prominent after this event. She starred in movies by the occult filmmaker Kenneth Anger. She was a main star of it. She was a head of occult circles the rest of her life. But she referred to herself as a female as the Wormwood Star. So she clearly saw a female personification in their internal teaching to a feminine personality known as Wormwood and as a star itself. Just another quick comment back in Acts chapter 19, the chaos at Ephesus. I mentioned this Black Awakening connection, and I think people can read that to see if there's anything to this mass invocation of demonic spirits in people, that there's sort of a initial run of it in Acts 19 when you see how the people were taken over and almost cost the life of Paul and his followers, chased them into the arena, if I can remember right, or the amphitheater at the time. So, in closing, I just want to say that I'm putting a further hypothesis here that this leads me to suspect that there are plans that are being prepared for a future mass evocation of this wormwood god or goddess. And there's three aspects that appear to me from the literature that are required to have a successful mass evocation. The first, it helps to have the use of drugs to chemically assist humans in establishing contact and opening portals to the spirit world, to actually overcome whatever limitations we have, any barriers to overcome them. And I would say that if you do some studying in this, you will find, and you're probably already aware, most of you, that a very large portion of our population is already on mood-enhancing or reality-altering drugs. Many of these are, in fact, tryptamine-based products that affect our neurotransmitters, and in many ways are very, very close cousins, very similar in their look to serotonin, to DMT, and similar chemicals itself. And their chemistry is just very, very close to hallucinogens and their effect on neurotransmitters. The long-term effects of these chemicals, since there really so many of them are new in this generation, are not understood. But they have documentation where some of these drugs have gone and had the opposite effect at a later date, unexpectedly, of psychotic events that result in suicides, that result in death events of people, and even some of the mass shootings which we've had, and some of these shootings at schools and things, they have later found out that some of these chemicals, these people were on them, and suspected that exacerbated an event that caused this effect. Now, I also want to make sure people are aware that it's not just drugs that you take that can cause this. This also includes foods. And we are surrounded by an atmosphere of genetically modified foods. Our corns and soybean are almost 100% genetically modified. Other drugs or other foods are in this case. Also the water we take. I heard Brother Chris's comment about my water here. Fluoride is in a large portion of the population. And further study, by the way, I did on fluoride shows that it does have an assisting effect. One would think because of this calcification process in the pineal that it actually inhibits its performance. But other literature I found that fluoride chemicals can actually help take these particular drugs and transmit them and get them through to the neurotransmitters. They help facilitate their function. But our prescription drugs right now are probably the most abused drugs for hallucinogenic experiences or even religious experience, for things that aren't illegal. Sometimes they're prescription, sometimes they're over the counter, but those are being used right now. And to keep an open mind on what we ingest as being possible use for sorcery, I'd just like to remind our listeners that what did Satan offer Eve for her first experience like this, her first mystical experience to be illumined and to know knowledge? It actually was a food. He suggested she eat a particular food, and this would open eyes and help her see good and evil. So it's not just chemicals you take. It can be foods and other things that have this effect. The second leg of the triad for mass evocation are rituals. And rituals are events like you picture for magic spells and activities that occur. My hypothesis and my suggestion is that rituals, the reason why they're a key component of the evocation is they have some kind of effect in focusing faith. That there's some further human limitation in being able to stay focused in the spirit world, and rituals assist humans in being able to stay focused. And that's why the Bible is very, very careful, I believe, about graven images, because graven images can actually serve that function of focusing faith in bad directions. And that's why icons, I think, are a real danger. Any kind of graven images like this that can focus faith, one has to be careful on because what one might accomplish with it. And I believe these rituals are already going on in our mass media. I think we're already becoming acclimated. In fact, probably leading the charge amongst the media are our movies and our music for doing overt pagan occult rituals in our music with our top artists in our movies as well too. If you see sneak previews in the movie theater, almost every one of them are about some kind of occult activity, and such activities are ongoing. In fact, we've even gotten young people acclimated through Harry Potter and other things to make this just sort of a normal part of what's going on. But then we have TV. TV is doing the same thing too. I mean, we have video games that actually have these kind of activities. And even if you look at single events like Super Bowl halftime shows and things like this, these kind of events are happening over and over again, acclimating us for this importance of rituals. And in fact, I would just go back, just to give you another example, to the early days of Nazism, when they would have these Nuremberg demonstrations. Those were carefully constructed rituals to focus people's faith in Hitler and this ancient belief system that he was selling. And so we're being prepared in a similar form, I believe. Now, the last leg of the triad are willing subjects that are willing to invite the spirit or host. I believe God puts a protective barrier for those who do not want contact with the spirit world. Usually, when we are harassed by demonic spirits, it's because we've allowed some portal that we've opened a door for them, whether it's a Ouija board or other occult activities or things like this. And so they need to get the population more willing to invite these hosts. And I believe that there is a major PR effort, public relations, that have been going on for decades in our society and our media to create sympathy for the devil and for other dark forces. And a couple examples I would use are TV shows like Fallen on ABC, which actually showed a fallen Nephilim that was trying to get redemption. This movie Legion, which actually showed Michael the archangel rebelling against God on our behalf because in their storyline, God wanted to destroy us, along with Gabriel, and Michael comes to fight God on our behalf. Even shows like Medium, which put a happy face on these kind of activities of connecting with the spirit world. And I think you will find for other people who don't fall for these kind of things that there are more subtle things, very kind, gentle, light worker type New Age activities, the environmental movement, Masonic activities, Masons, yoga, martial arts. These all can be seemingly unassuming adult entryways into inviting, becoming acclimated and inviting portals for these kind of evocations. And I just want to point out here that human assistance in this process of bringing forth these three aspects may not always even come from willing or even witting subjects that are aware of what they're doing. There can be, many executives in movies and television, other kind of things, and publishing, who aren't aware of this kind of stuff and do not realize they're even promoting it. Not every one of them wears a cape and horns in the back, although there are some that do. I would submit that probably most Americans that aren't Christians, their basic gods mostly are Mammon and Bacchus. They worship money and they worship pleasure and anything that they find fun or fulfilling. But they can be unaware subject to help promote this activity. So in conclusion, I'd just like to say that in summarizing, drugs play a key role in opening portals and contacting the spirit realm. And not all, but many, but not all of them are hallucinations, and many of them are well documented that cannot be explained by just mere hallucinations. The consumption of substances with psychotropic properties are becoming increasingly significant in their impact in recent days. Some are done wittingly, some unwittingly in this process. And again, there's new developments as far as additives to our food and water to expand it. And this evocation scenario that I've shown here, even a black awakening response by the subjects, can even be consistent with at least one biblical interpretation or understanding of these passages. There are actions, I believe, now behind the scenes right now to prepare for this event, that it is premeditated and being planned, and that I do not know, Christians may or may not be around to see this event when it occurs. But I would submit, even if we're not, the impact is already happening in society with the number of people who are succumbing to the spiritual impacts of drug consumption and other kind of occult activity, and as well as the increase in psychotic violence that's occurring. So, the final actions to take to close this, actions to take in response, I suggest. One is control the substances you and your family ingest. And that requires, and that's all materials, drugs, food, anything you take. And that requires education, a substantial commitment on your behalf for education, tempered by reasonableness and balance. One can become paranoid in the subject, so you've got to be reasonable, but be smart, be informed in your decisions, and invest the time to be aware of what you ingest. Now, not only the physical intake, but also the intellectual and spiritual intake as well. So control the audiovisual programming, and where that programming is for a purpose, that you and your family are exposed to. And I believe that's not just limited to what we're used to of controlling profanity, sex, and violence as being dangerous to our families. Like, for example, kids shows and things like that. I think if you watch some of the children's shows today, there are psychedelic elements and even magical elements that don't register necessarily in profanity or violence or sex, may not even be kicked up with protective software, but you need to be aware of the worldview that you're being taught to your children. I also think that you should talk to your children, even if they're older teenagers, about a real Christian worldview, a real one, in a Christian perspective to what is being expressed in the culture media. You will not be able to totally shield them from exposure if they're going to school, if they're around other friends. But what you can do is be ahead of the curve and instruct them about what they're being prepared and what they understand. And what you will find is that it will not be a turnoff to your children. They will actually be fascinated by the material similar to what's been in this presentation and some of the radio shows like Brother Chris's show and things. They will be fascinated to hear about this, and it'll be a way for you to connect with your youth about this. And you can also fill the void. If you have to limit certain entertainment and other content that they can have, there can be some very interesting Bible study that goes on, sharing with Christians, and there's even some fiction, some action fiction and things like this that are done by Christian, from enlightened Christians about these topics that can actually have healthy understanding for them and something that can actually fascinate them. And also, I think you should take time to warn family and friends, churchgoers, and the public. Many of them will not understand when you tell them about the information we've covered here. Even Christians, it will be too overwhelming for them. But I recommend that everybody listening here take the risk anyway to share this information with people you know, and hopefully they will appreciate it later. And I'd like to quote a passage as the final word here, that maybe you could consider in a different light from what you had before, given what we've covered right now. This is from 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 7 and 8. And I'm gonna include the Greek words in here with some definitions, some of the alternative definitions within Strong's Word. It says, "For mysterion, or mysteries, religious secrets, which are confided only to the initiated and not ordinary mortals. For mysterion of iniquity doth already work. Only arti," Greek arti, which means now at this time, kateko, which means that which hinders the Antichrist from making his appearance. Only now at that time, that hindrance is occurring until genomai, which means to arise, to appear in history, come upon the stage, will come out of the mesos, or the midst. And then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy the brightness of his coming. So, this passage can be read to say that these mysteries or religious secrets confided only to the initiated, pertaining to iniquity, are already at work, and only now at this time, that which hinders the Antichrist from making his appearance is occurring until it arises, or it appears in history, comes on the world stage, out of our midst, and then the wicked one will be revealed. And I think this is consistent with the discussion narrative we've had today. And that concludes my presentation, Brother Chris, on this information on spirit portals.
So he's saying he wants to go somewhere where the walls won't cave in. Poor guy.
Over a fucking fortnight I've been here. I'm not fucking staying here any fucking longer. Why open the fucking door? That's how it's fucking done.
So it sounds like they want this guy to stay here longer, which is concerning for me because he's stayed here for 14 days.
Mate, you gotta calm down or you're gonna...
Mate, you gotta take me somewhere fucking else.
Calm down or you're gonna get fucking gas.
Fucking do it then.
Alright, get back.
It's not gonna fucking change the fact that I'm fucking pissed off.
Stay there.
I don't even have a fucking crossword to fucking fill in.
He's saying he doesn't even have a crossword to...
Yes! Except there's no fucking, it's buried.
Rightio, Nancy. What we need you to do is get back in the room.
If you weren't fucking listening, it's fucking locked.
Stay there. Where's your card?
I feel for these guys. This is shit. This is hotel quarantine.
12 fucking clock, midnight. What the fuck is the point of that? I live 3 hours away.
Stay there.
So he's supposed to be at 12 o'clock midnight.
Yes.
Gotta go back in your room. We need you back
For how fucking long? I'm not fucking staying here tonight.
Stay back. Just
I'm in my fucking room. This is fucking
Get your bag. Move your bag. Move your bag.
Move me to a different fucking